I want to just welcome you guys to another edition of Inside with IAIS. This is Paul Wegner here, and I'm here with Dr. Singer and Craig Nelson. Dr. Singer is a research associate with IAIS. He's also an adjunct professor and the research archaeologist for the Maryland Historic Trust. And Craig Nelson is one of our trustees, an avid archaeologist, Paleo-Indian archaeology enthusiast. And if you are members of the museum, then you will hopefully have been watching our discussion of the Templeton site. But we wanted to touch on this fad of what is a Paleo-Indian diet really? It's a thing that's going on for the last few years, that people are going back to eating the things that people in Paleo-Indian times or in the past or in pre-contact times might have eaten. Primarily meat. And but what does that really involve, and what are the evidence that we actually have for that? So we wanted to just ask Dr. Singer and Craig, what are your takes on what do we know or presume to know or can speculate that Paleo-Indian people, especially in New England, actually ate?
Sure. So when we're thinking about the Paleo-Indian period in New England, we're thinking of people, some of the first people to live in the Northeast or live in New England probably getting there about 12,900 years ago, something around there. At the Templeton site, which is a collection curated by the Institute for American Indian Studies, we have evidence of Paleo-Indians camping in Washington Depot, Connecticut around 12,000 years ago. So that's about the time that we're thinking for Paleo-Indians. At the end of the last ice age, during a cold period called the Younger Dryas, so colder than it would be at present today. And so the landscape and kind of the food choices that people would have had are different than what you would see looking out your back door in Connecticut. So there wouldn't likely be as many deer, for instance. So based on these colder climatic conditions, and environmental reconstructions using cores and pollen analysis, it looks like the Northeast would be more of a subarctic-like environment. And so think about subarctic-like resources when thinking about what perhaps Paleo-Indians might have been eating in the Northeast. Mm. The evidence that we have in terms of like hard evidence, so remains of animals, faunal evidence, and remains of plants, botanical evidence, it is very scant. So there's not much evidence. And the reason that is because the soils in New England are very acidic. And so organic materials rot away over time. And so there's very little organic evidence preserved from about 12,000 years ago. But occasionally, organic materials like botanicals, so plant remains or faunal remains, like bones, are burned, and when they're carbonized, they preserve better. And so some sites we have a little evidence of calcined bone and carbonized plant remains, and what those consist of are caribou bones, so small fragments of caribou, including at sites in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Evidence of cervid, which could be caribou, but it's not quite diagnostic enough to tell. There's evidence for cervid at a site in Maine, as well as another site in New Hampshire. There's also some evidence of small game. There are evidence of beaver remains from Massachusetts. And then for plant remains, again, very limited evidence, but in Maine and New Hampshire, fruit berry remains have been found, so like raspberry. There was a water lily seed in New Hampshire suggesting potential marsh resources being used. And then there are hawthorn seeds that were found in association with Paleo-Indian contexts in Pennsylvania. So that is kind of the grand sweeping summary of the physical remains. So not much, but nevertheless, the evidence for the Northeast does suggest a subarctic-like diet, likely reliant on caribou as a main resource.
So when you say subarctic, you mean like it's like a tundra here? That's just like open plains and there's just caribou just running around in big herds in Washington, Connecticut?
So the landscape based on environmental reconstructions and pollen analysis looks like it would be organized by kind of latitude. So the north, like far north, so like Maine and the Canadian Maritimes, some of those places might have been tundra-like. But then as you start moving further south, you get boreal forest, or you get spruce parkland, which is kind of more open spruce trees, but still open patchy areas. And then further south, you get a boreal forest, so pines and spruce, but in a closed forest. So Connecticut was likely forested, but with many more cold-tolerant spruce and pine, and less warm-loving trees like oak. There is some evidence for oak in Connecticut, so there are some hardwoods, but not nearly as many.
Yeah, something you found at Templeton, correct?
Correct. So at Templeton, we have radiocarbon dated small fragments of oak, at least 3, if not 4 times, and they are associated with the Paleoindian component. And so that does suggest oak certainly clearly is evident at Templeton, and which would suggest it's in Connecticut. But so where caribou might be running around, the long distance migratory herds would have likely been traveling in the spring and through the summer in the north, so up into Maine, and then moving south in the fall to overwinter in the forests, perhaps around the boundary of Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire, if not further south, and dispersing into small groups, small herds into like Connecticut. But so there wouldn't be large herds of caribou in Connecticut. But so other species that might have been around would be things like moose, and then small game, of course, like Arctic hares or rabbits, and beavers and other fur bearers, which would have been edible, but also really important as a source of fur to create clothing to help with those colder conditions. Another source of food that would have perhaps been exploited by Paleo-Indians would have been maritime resources associated with the Champlain Sea. So up into Vermont, there was an inland sea at the end of the last ice age. And that sea was productive. It has things like ringed seals that have been recovered, and whale bones. So it's not like it would have been an area with limited productivity. It would have been a maritime resource in New England, in the Northeast. And there are Paleo-Indian sites that have been found along relic shorelines of the Champlain Sea in Vermont, which is at least suggestive that perhaps Paleo-Indians also exploited things like seals in those sites. But there's no hard evidence for it yet. It's just that association of site location with that large feature of the Champlain Sea.
Awesome. And so if we don't have the actual physical bones or botanical evidence, then how do we know they were hunting? Like, what is the evidence for that? What do we have? Sure.
So I would say, well, we have the little bit of bones, so we have at least some evidence. But then the other thing that we can look at is we can try to reconstruct Paleo-Indian social behavior based on the material we do have, like the stone tools that we recover and how they're patterned across the site, and using that evidence to kind of reconstruct what people might have been doing at a site. So for instance, at Templeton, we have multiple activity areas where hunting tools are being produced. We have evidence for fluted points being made and then being transported away from the site, because we don't find the finished tools then thrown away again. All we find is evidence for them being produced. And based on that evidence, it looks like at least 17 fluted points, if not many more, were made at Templeton to then transport somewhere else. That large quantity of fluted points being produced suggests likely that people were preparing for a communal hunt. And that communal hunt, the thing that a communal group would have been most useful for hunting would have been a large herd animal. And so for the Northeast, that would have been the caribou. And so what likely is occurring at Templeton is people are in the boreal forest in Connecticut, making a bunch of hunting tools, and I think perhaps to move further north to intercept a herd of caribou to collect caribou meat, but also collect hides and caribou hides, and also their antlers and other materials, that other resources that could have been collected from caribou, which would have been a very important resource, both for meat and also clothing and making tents and making other organic tools that would have been really important for people living at the end of the last ice age 12,000 years ago.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. If you guys are interested in learning more about that, we do have a longer discussion of Templeton that we did currently for members that was discussed with Dr. Singer. And also, we do have a Litchfield Archaeology Club that is part of the museum. And Craig is heavily involved in that. And Craig, eventually, we're hoping to get out in the field possibly this summer, if not definitely next summer, and working on a potential Paleo-Indian site, correct?
This summer, maybe late if we start with it. We probably will end up at Deer Run to start for a while, and then in the fall, hopefully we can get back to Templeton with a lot of other people from all over. The other thing, as far as your diet's concerned, we also buried in the archives of the museum back in late 70s, early 80s. There were corings done up around Robin Swamp to delineate the glacial lake. And they have all the pollen counts from back then when they went down. So that record is there too. So we could also find out what type of vegetation and stuff we had then. And honestly, when you're thinking about a hunter-gatherer, even if it's in today, you're gonna get one large piece here and there. You even if they go north to get caribou, you're only gonna do that once a year. The rest of the year, you have to rely on everything else that you can find. And that's where your fruit and vegetables are gonna be coming in. There's not a lot of them but they're there, and you have to learn what roots you can eat. And so over time, not a great diet for today. Not good on our insides, let's put it that way, or our teeth. But it's a hard one. And today's diet, it's not what we would call a well-balanced meal. But we can find other ways of what vegetation was around. And I personally think that, you can only hold meat for so long. You can dry it, you can salt it. Were they salting? I don't know. They could get salt if they wanted to from up at the Champlain Sea if they dried it, but it's not a product like we have on the shelf for them. And things like the beaver would have a lot of fat in it. So that would hold them over a lot more. Say they were here in the winter, they would get their fat from something like the beaver. And so there's a lot of speculation out there on what you can and can't have, but some of it you can match up today and others you can't. So it's hard.
The last thing I would kind of say about diet is the other thing with hunter-gatherers is they were very active. And so that might be something to inspire people today, is you can eat more and ingest more calories if you're active and going on hikes and going on walks and biking. So hunter-gatherers were very active and helped kind of maintain their health. And so something that, especially in our current kind of state of stay at home, is something we need to always remember is we need to take time to stay active.
Take time to stay active, and check your local butcher. Maybe they have caribou. I don't know. It might be available. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk about the Paleo-Indian diet. And for those of you watching this, look again every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We are doing these videos with Inside with IAIS. And so keep following us for more of these types of videos. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you again, Dr. Singer. Thank Singer. Thank you, Craig. We really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great being here.